Yes, dear scholars, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome in the session and good afternoon. Today we are discussing South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think it is important for our course in many ways. It is a very good reading, and when we discuss South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we learn many lessons. Yes. So our discussion is based on a research paper. Its title is Between Vengeance and Forgiveness. Its author is Martha Mino, professor of law at Harvard Law School. The paper was published in Negotiation Journal in October 1998. So, Martha Mino says that South Africans are facing their painful past through a new national effort called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC. So, when the South Africans were establishing and implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it was a painful experience for the nation. This commission has already heard thousands of stories. The stories are about murders, torture, and other abuses from the apartheid era. And you may know the apartheid era was a time in the South African history when uh, whites minority ruled blacks majority. So it was an oppressive rule. The whites oppressed the blacks. It is called the apartheid. Many of the stories are even shown on television. The TRC is built on South Africa's constitutional value of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a constitutional value of South Africa. Ubuntu is an African idea. It means humanity, kindness, and shared community. Ubuntu means humanity, kindness, and shared community. People accused of crimes can get amnesty, but only if they meet certain conditions. People accused of crimes can get amnesty, but only if they meet certain conditions. Amnesty is provided, but it is not unconditional, it is not absolute. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission tries to restore dignity to victims. It's one of its purposes is to restore dignity to victims, help people heal, and bring a divided nation together. So these are the basic objectives of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Africa: to restore dignity to victims, to help people heal, and to bring a divided nation together, to bring unity among the nation, national unity. It is also one of the objectives of the TRC. How it all started. Nelson Mandela, after being in prison for 27 years, helped bring an end to apartheid peacefully. During the peace talks, one big question came up, and the big question was, how should the new government deal with all the crimes of apartheid? It was one big question the South Africans faced as a nation. The old rulers wanted amnesty. Amnesty means freedom from punishment. The old rulers wanted amnesty because they had committed crimes against blacks. they had oppressed the blacks majority as a condition for handing over power peacefully. So, when negotiations took place for transition of power from whites to blacks, the old rulers wanted amnesty as a condition for handing over power peacefully. The interim constitution that followed became a bridge from the divided past to a new democratic future. So obviously, when the whites oppressed the blacks, it was the nation was divided. So the past of the South African nation is divided. So unity was needed after the democratic transition. It specifically mentioned Ubuntu. The constitution, the new constitution of South Africa, specifically mentioned Ubuntu and called for a fair process to free people from prosecution for politically motivated crimes. The Constitution of South Africa called for a fair process to free people from prosecution for politically motivated crimes. Birth of the TRC. The African National Congress ANC, led by Mandela, wanted a truth commission. It was Mandela's party, African National Congress ANC. Truth Commission means an official way to investigate the truth about past torture and killings. The ANC had already investigated human rights abuses within its own camps in Angola. African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's party, it also had committed human rights abuses. It had also had committed crimes in its camps when it was waging guerrilla war against the whites government. They believed that facing their own wrongs showed commitment to human rights and new moral values, unlike those of apartheid. So the Nelson Mandela's party, African National Congress, its leaders believed that facing their own wrongs showed commitment to human rights and new moral values, unlike those of apartheid. ANC leaders felt that a National Truth Commission would honor the victims. A National Truth Commission would honor the victims and it would reveal what really happened during apartheid. The National Party was the old ruling party. So these were the two major parties. The National Party, it was the Whites Party, old rulers, and African National Congress, it was the party led by Nelson Mandela. It represented blacks. The National Party wanted a reconciliation commission. They mainly cared about amnesty for their people. So the whites, old rulers, they were mostly cared about their amnesty. A new beginning. In the early 1990s, a settlement was reached between all sides. A settlement was reached between all sides in the early 1990s. On April 27, 1994, South Africa held its first free democratic election. The world watched as people of all races waited in long, joyful lines to vote. So it was a sort of celebration and festivity that the people, all the people of South Africa, got the right to vote. The interim constitution of 1993 was adopted. It described itself as a bridge from the past to a future of human rights, democracy, and peace. It also directed Parliament to create a law allowing amnesty for actions linked to political objectives from the conflicts of the past. So it was given in the Constitution. It was provided in the Constitution. The TRC is formed. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is formed on July 19, 1995. Parliament officially created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. It had three committees: the Human Rights Violations Committee, the Amnesty Committee, and the Reparation and Rehabilitation Committees. These were the three committees: Human Rights Violations, Amnesty, and Reparation and Rehabilitation. The TRC was established after extensive consultations with many groups and communities. After extensive consultations with many groups and communities, it was different from other truth commissions around the world because it was created through democratic legislation. It involved wide public debate and participation in its design. So, before establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Africa, uh, it was debated. The matter was debated, and public, many people took part in the debate, and many people participated in its design. Other examples around the world, similar examples of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in the world. In El Salvador, a Truth Commission was created as part of UN sponsored peace talks. In Argentina, the commission came from a presidential order. In Rwanda, international and local human rights groups tried to form a short lived Truth Commission. In Rwanda, international and local human rights groups tried to form a short lived Truth Commission. Mandela himself had earlier appointed two commissions to investigate torture in African National Congress camps. So, before the formation of this National Commission, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, Nelson Mandela had earlier appointed two commissions to investigate torture in the camps of his party. In Brazil, a private project supported by the Catholic Church secretly copied and studied a million pages of military trial records in Brazil. The result was a 12-volume report and a famous book called Brazil Never Again. So the findings were published in this book, 12-volume report in Brazil. The book revealed hundreds of murders and thousands of torture cases in Brazil. The book's huge impact led Brazil to sign the United Nations Convention Against Torture. Religion, debate, and forgiveness. After apartheid ended, South African leaders and scholars studied all these earlier truth commissions. Some people worried about the growing religious influence in the process. Professor Andre Du Toit said that as churches got more involved, religious ideas of forgiveness began to overshadow political and human rights concerns. Obviously, the religious people got involved when the debate started, and many people participated in the debate. So, many religious people, churches, priests, they got involved in the debate. Obviously, their point of view was religious, and the Christian religion emphasizes forgiveness. So their focus was less on political and human rights concerns. Still, South Africa's Justice Minister Dullah Omar said that public debate made the TRC legitimate and fair. Public debate made the Truth and Reconciliation Commission legitimate and fair. He emphasized the importance of compromise, justice principles, and international law in shaping the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Dullah Omar emphasized the importance of compromise, the importance of justice principles, and the importance of international law in shaping the TRC. Leaders like Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu set a moral tone of forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness and reconciliation. So the focus of the religious people was merely on forgiveness, but these leaders, they also emphasized reconciliation along with forgiveness. The black majority now had voting rights, but white South Africans who were in minority still controlled most of the economic resources. So unity was crucial. The idea behind the TRC. South Africans agreed that to truly unite and reconcile, they needed the whole truth about human rights violations. They needed the whole truth about human rights violations. The truth must be officially investigated in a fair way. The truth must be fully acknowledged by the perpetrators. And the truth must be shared publicly, naming both victims and offenders. Amnesty was seen as a necessary price for a peaceful transition to democracy. It was conditional. Only those who applied individually and fully disclosed their crimes for critical reasons could get amnesty. So amnesty was provided, but it was conditional. It was not open to all. Only those who applied individually for amnesty and only those who fully disclosed their crimes for critical reasons could get amnesty. The idea was to trade truth for amnesty, trade truth for amnesty, and amnesty for truth, helping society move toward a strong democratic future. While I am discussing this, I am thinking whether there is some connection between this idea of through trading truth for amnesty and the plea bargain that we witness in Pakistan, particularly in any NAB cases. Plea bargains are made where the corrupt people, if they have corrupted 10 billions, they return just 1 or 2 billions and they are forgiven. They are so. I think at the academic level, we need to research and to explore whether there is some connection, some similarity in these two things, trading truth for amnesty on the one hand and plea bargains on the other, and to what extent the plea bargains are justified. I think these are the interesting questions for our future research. Yes, uh, getting back to the TRC. The idea was to trade truth for amnesty and amnesty for truth, helping society move toward a strong democratic future. The TRC didn't stop people from seeking truth. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Africa did not stop people from seeking truth. It actually encouraged it. The TRC actually encouraged seeking the truth. It helped collect facts and personal accounts that were otherwise hidden or destroyed. The outgoing apartheid rulers had destroyed many records, so this was the only way to recover the truth. Purpose and structure of the TRC. The TRC had several goals. Number one, find out what really happened during apartheid. Find out what really happened during apartheid. It was one of the goals of the TRC. Another goal was to help the public and government officials face the truth. The third goal of the TRC was to use amnesty as a tool to make people come forward, to make people come forward so that they recognize, they acknowledge, they confess, they make confessions that they have committed these crimes. And another goal was of the TRC was to recommend compensation for the victims of the crimes and steps for healing. So compensation only was not enough. The steps for healings, the steps for healing were also required. The victims needed healing. The TRC wanted to show that the new government accepted the painful past. The TRC wanted to show that the new government accepted the painful past, strengthen trust in democracy, that the new government wanted to strengthen trust in democracy, and that the new government wanted to build a society that respects human rights. These goals could only succeed if the government actually took action on the TRC's recommendations. Second best or something better. Second best or something better. Some people asked, is the TRC a weak substitute for real trials? Some people ask this question. Is the TRC a weak substitute for real trials, or is it a new, better way to deal with crimes of the past? Or is it a new, better way to deal with crimes of the past? Trials or prosecutions are often seen as the best way to handle human rights crimes. Usually, traditionally, trials are often seen as the best way to handle human rights crimes. Trials punish the guilty and show that no one is above the law. So, it is the traditional justice which is practiced in many parts of the world. They can also help stop future violations. Trials, prosecutions, and punishments can also help stop future violations because sometimes people are deterred by punishments. But trials are hard to hold after big conflicts because there may not be enough money or skilled lawyers after big conflicts, because the government may be too weak or afraid to prosecute powerful people. So, in such cases, after the civil wars, the trials, the prosecutions, they may lead to more instability. They may further lead to another civil war. So sometimes the governments are not willing to conduct the trials, to hold the trials, and to punish the culprits of the past for the past political crimes. Problems with trials. Trials can be very stressful and expensive. Victims have to go through painful cross examinations. No, victims I have already suffered at the hands of the others. Now, when trials are conducted, the victims again they are involved in investigations and cross examinations, and they feel further hurt and humiliated sometimes. They rarely get to tell their story fully. The victims rarely get to tell their story fully or emotionally. The victims can't explain what the suffering really felt like. They can't explain what the suffering really felt like. A trial focuses only on proving guilt. A trial does not focus on the full story of a nation's trauma. A trial focuses only on proving guilt, not on the full story of a nation's trauma. Why truth commissions can work better? Truth commissions, like the TRC, let victims tell their stories in full. So victims get the opportunity to tell their story in completion. They gave a public space to speak. Truth commissions gave the victims a public space to speak, be believed, and be respected. So, at the truth commissions, the victims can speak where people believe them and where people respect the victims. They aim to record everything. The truth commissions aim to record everything, not just one person's guilt. So, here the focus is not only the crime, not only the victim. The focus is also on the suffering of the victim, the feelings of the victim. They can release hidden facts when people are offered conditional amnesty. So, at the Truth Commissions, the violators, the people who have committed crimes, political crimes, they hope they can get amnesty so they can speak the truth, they can share the facts which are hidden. In South Africa, this meant people who confessed could get amnesty. Those who didn't could still be prosecuted. The violators, the committers of the political crimes who didn't confess, they could still be punished. The TRC could reject amnesty applications if the crimes were too cruel and the acts were not truly political. So, in these cases, the TRC could punish the uh, committers of the crime. Building a national record. The TRC worked like a historian for the whole country. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Africa worked like a historian for the whole country. It connected the stories of victims, it connected the stories of offenders, and it connected the events into one national account. Trials only look at one case. The TRC looked at the bigger picture. This made the TRC's work more complete, though not perfect. It had limited time, only 2 years, and it had limited money, so it couldn't do everything. Focus on victims. The TRC focused strongly on victims, even those forgotten by history. The TRC emphasized healing and reconciliation. Television and radio broadcasted the hearings showing real human pain. The people told their stories, the violators confessed their crimes, and the victims shared their suffering and hurt feelings, and they were broadcast on television and radio. Many victims said they wanted acknowledgement more than punishment. So some of the victims said if they're the people who uh, tortured them, they are punished. It's okay, but it will be better if the violators acknowledge that they have tortured them, they have committed the crime. The Human Rights Committee listened to survivors and families and told them, you were right, what happened was wrong. The survivors of the crimes, the Human Rights Committee listened to the survivors of the crimes and they listened to the families of the survivors and told them, you were right. What happened to you was wrong. Structure of the TRC committees. There were three committees. The first, as we have already mentioned, Human Rights Violations Committee. It heard victims' stories. The Amnesty Committee handled applications for amnesty. The Reparation and Rehabilitation Committee suggested how to compensate and support victims. How to compensate and support victims. The Human Rights Committee began first and quickly shaped how the TRC was viewed by the public. The Human Rights Committee began first and quickly shaped how the TRC was viewed by the public. Victims could speak, they could cry, and they could share without being doubted or blamed. Amnesty and reparations. People who wanted amnesty had 12 months to apply. Victims had to wait much longer for reparations or government support. Some critics said killers walk free, but victims are still waiting. So, in all governmental affairs, critics are always there, opposition is always there. So, in this case, there were many critics, and they criticized killers walk free, but victims are still waiting. Others said the act of testifying itself gave victims emotional relief and dignity. So, those who supported the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and its proceedings, they supported it, and they said the act of testifying itself gave victims emotional relief and dignity. Healing through speaking. Victims often said that telling their story helped them feel lighter. So, when they told their story, the people heard their story, they felt a relief, they felt lighter. Speaking out made their pain less lonely. So, before telling their story, they had suffered and they knew that the world does not know that they suffered. Now they were aware that the world has got to know their story. So it was relieving. It decreased their pain and loneliness. It helped them understand that their suffering was not their fault. It was caused by a system of oppression. Being heard publicly was powerful, especially when the whole nation was listening. Especially when the whole nation was listening. For many, it was not about revenge, it was about being recognized as human again. For many South Africans, for many victims, it was not about revenge, it was about being recognized as human again. Because during the apartheid, under the oppressive rule. They were tortured, they were oppressed, and they were not considered as humans. Now, in the proceedings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they were treated as humans. That is why their stories were heard, and they were provided the opportunity to get justice or to get compensated. Healing through testimony and inquiry. The main idea behind a truth commission is healing, not just punishment. So, healing is also important here. The belief is when victims and even perpetrators share their stories publicly, healing can begin. The TRC's goal was to create a fair and detailed record of what happened during apartheid. The TRC's goal was to create a fair and detailed record of what happened during apartheid by helping people tell their stories and having the government officially acknowledge them. The TRC aimed to help the whole country heal. It also hoped that its final report would give South Africa a structure to deal with its painful past. The belief was telling and hearing truth can heal both individuals and nations. So, not only the individuals are healed, the nations are also healed through this process of telling the truth and hearing the truth. Testimony as therapy. Journalist Tina Rosenberg compared truth commissions to therapy. She said truth commissions and therapy both try to help people with trauma. Both try to help people with trauma by letting them talk about their pain. In trauma centers, therapy is used. In both cases, people need someone who listens seriously and validates their story. In both cases, in truth commissions and in trauma centers, people need someone who listens seriously and validates their story. Victims have to reconnect the painful event with their full life story so it makes sense in their minds. She added, if a whole country is traumatized, then the entire country needs this kind of process. But some disagree. Some people think remembering too much can hurt instead of help. They say individuals or nations can have too much memory. Maybe the problem isn't memory itself, but the wrong kind of memory, shallow or stuck in the past. Shallow memory can maybe the wrong kind of memory. It may be the problem, or being stuck in the past may be the problem, or maybe it's when truth looks only backward and doesn't build a bridge to the future. Writer Lawrence Weschler quoted a poem, Unchopping a Tree. Unchopping a Tree. This poem describes how impossible it is to put a tree back together after it's been destroyed. Once a tree has been chopped, once a tree has been cut into pieces, it is impossible to put it back together. So the poem describes this, unchopping a tree. The poem warns truth telling alone can't bring back what is lost. Truth telling alone cannot bring back what is lost. You can rebuild the pieces, but the leaves remain dead. You can put the branches of the chopped tree together, but the leaves remain dead. For those who suffered, for those who died, healing may sound meaningless. Some survivors feel they died inside too. So maybe the best they can hope so maybe the best they can hope for is endurance, not complete healing. Limits of truth. The problem isn't too much truth. It's that truth can never be complete enough. It is a problem that truth can never be complete enough. Real events can be seen in totally opposite ways. Example: one side may say the war in Sarajevo was an attack on civilians. The other side may call it self defense. It cannot be both at once. This grows that truth can be very hard to agree on. Different roles, different feelings. Victims, perpetrators, and bystanders all relate to the truth in different ways. Each group experiences and understands trauma differently. Studying the effects of the TRC on all these groups is almost impossible. Some people were all three things at once. All three things: victims, perpetrators, and bystanders. Number one, victims. Number two, perpetrators. Number three, bystanders. So, some people were all three things at once. A young person sees his parents harassed by secret police. He joins the resistance group and is later tortured. So, when his father was harassed, he was the bystander and his father was the victim. Then he joined the resistance group and is later tortured. Now he becomes the victim himself. After that, he becomes violent too, attacking civilians. So it is the third phase, third dimension. Now he has become the perpetrator. Others become informants after being tortured. Such people struggle to confess honestly because they were both victims and perpetrators. So it is difficult for them to tell how they suffered and how they made others suffer. It's hard for them to forgive themselves or explain what they did. Healing versus justice. Talking about healing often replaces talk about justice. Healing uses the language of health, not law. Justice uses the language of law, not health. Justice becomes part of healing when it helps victim recover and when groups reconcile. But sometimes justice, like trials or punishment, can reopen old wounds instead of healing them. Sometimes justice can reopen old wounds instead of healing them. Healing and justice can work together if the nation is rebuilding under democratic and fair conditions. But they clash when the victimized group has been destroyed, expelled, or silenced. Healing and justice can clash when the victimized group has been destroyed, when the group has been expelled, when the group has been silenced. Emotional healing and the law. The language of emotions and healing does not fit easily with legal systems. Legal systems usually focus on guilt, evidence, and punishment, not emotional recovery. Legal systems usually do not focus on emotional recovery. Legal systems focus usually on guilt and evidence and punishment. After the Holocaust, for example, early responses were about law and justice, not therapy. But over the 20th century, psychology became more important in public life. Survivors and their families began emphasizing the need to heal, not just punish the perpetrators. Healing after violence. Many scholars and therapists have studied how people and societies can heal after collective violence. Eric Santner studied trauma after the Holocaust and Nazi era. He said trauma overwhelms the human mind. Victims have to rebuild the way they make sense of the world. Victims of violence have to rebuild the way they make sense of the world. They must redefine themselves and their boundaries. The victims must redefine themselves and they must redefine their boundaries. Real healing means rebuilding both personal identity and social identity. So it also involves healing, also involves rebuilding personal identity as well as social identity. Robert J. Lifton said victims must rebuild their lifeline. They must create new inner meanings that include their trauma. Judith Herman developed a theory connecting trauma from wars, abuse, and oppression. She said, trauma first destroys a person's sense of safety and morality. Trauma first destroys a person's sense of safety and morality. Then it destroys the will to live. Trauma destroys the will to live. Long term fear and terror cause emotional breakdown and hopelessness. Survivors often have flashbacks, anger, and trouble trusting others. Herman explained that both individuals and societies can go into denial. Individuals and societies can deny the trauma, can deny the crime. They repress painful memories. They dream of revenge as part of recovery. But true healing requires remembering, not forgetting. True healing requires remembering. Steps toward healing. Survivors must talk about what happened. Hiding it makes things worse. Survivors of the or the victims of the crime must talk about what happened. Hiding it makes things worse. They cannot go back to who they were before. They cannot go back to who they were before. In other words, they cannot undo their experiences. They cannot undo their suffering. They must accept their pain as part of who they are now. They must accept their pain as part of who they are now. Healing means facing the truth, mourning the loss, taking positive action, reconnecting with others. Two key parts of healing: empowerment, feeling in control again. So it is one part of healing, empowerment. The other part of healing is reconnection, feeling part of a community again, to reconnecting with the community again. Empowerment and reconnection are two key parts of healing. Helping others or working to prevent future violence gives survivors purpose and hope. Helping others or working to prevent future violence gives survivors purpose and hope. So sometimes, in some cases, survivors have worked a lot to prevent future violence, and it gives them a sense of contribution and a sense of achievement and a sense of responsibility. So this it gives them some energy. Healing in a political context. It's still uncertain how these psychological ideas fit into political conflicts. Truth commissions are not therapy sessions, but they can borrow from therapy. Survivors may heal partly through political and social action, not only counseling. Survivors of the trauma, survivors of the political crime, may heal partly through political and social action, not only counseling. However, in a public setting like the TRC, it's harder to build a deep, trusting emotional relationship. It's harder to build a deep, trusting emotional relationship. Important questions remain. Can political movements also heal trauma? Should helpers like commissioners use the language of justice when supporting victims? You know, in the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, there are commissioners. The office holders are called commissioners. So, should helpers like commissioners use the language of justice when supporting victims? Power of truth telling. Therapist Judith Herman said, healing starts with telling the truth. The same idea shaped the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Victims were encouraged to tell their stories, not to get revenge, but to be heard and acknowledged. The belief was truth frees people. Frees people. Truth leads to freedom. Exposing painful secrets helps sick societies recover. Exposing painful secrets helps sick societies recover. Many therapists have seen how survivors start healing when they talk openly about trauma. Many therapists have seen how survivors start healing when they talk openly about trauma. Keeping silent keeps them sick. Telling the story helps them take back dignity and self respect. Keeping silent keeps them sick. Telling the story helps them take back dignity and self respect. The restorative power of truth telling. Psychologist Judith Herman said something very important. The whole idea of therapy is based on one belief. What is that belief? Telling the truth heals. So it is the whole idea of therapy. Telling the truth heals. The goal isn't to get rid of demons, but to get acknowledgement. The goal of healing is to get acknowledgement. Turning personal pain into public testimony brings relief. Turning personal pain into public testimony brings relief. The belief is simple but powerful. Know the truth and it will set you free. The belief is simple but it is powerful. What is the belief? Know the truth and it will set you free. Expose the secrets of a sick society and it will begin to heal. It is the extension of that belief. expose the secrets of a sick society, and it will begin to heal. Some people wonder, is this really true or is it just faith? There isn't complete proof. But many real life stories show that talking about trauma helps. Testimony as healing. Testimony as healing. Inger Eger and Soren Jensen are two therapists, Inger Eger and Soren Jensen. They worked with refugees. They said giving testimony, whether privately like confession or publicly like in court, helps healing. So these are the two therapists. They say giving testimony helps healing, whether the testimony is given privately or publicly. If a testimony is given privately, it is like confession, or publicly when it is given in court, for example. Richard Mollica, another expert, explained when victims tell their stories, shame turns into dignity. Richard Mollica explained when victims tell their stories, shame turns into dignity. Their stories move from humiliation to honor. By speaking, they regain their sense of self. The victims regain their sense of self and their place in the world. Therapists who help survivors of political torture found that writing, talking, and revising testimony is an essential part of recovery. Writing, talking, and revising testimony is an essential part of recovery. Forgetting doesn't help, facing the pain does. Forgetting doesn't help the victims, facing the pain does help. A group of Chilean psychologists worked with torture victims. A group of Chilean psychologists worked with torture victims. They said victims need to tell their story in full detail. Victims need to tell their story in full detail. They must describe what happened and express their emotions. This helps them organize their experiences into a coherent life story. It allows them to truly feel their losses. It allows them to truly feel their grief. It allows grief. It allows them to truly feel their losses, grieve, and rebuild their identity. In short, talking heals. Crying and remembering are part of recovery. Speaking makes people whole again, moving from past to future. When people face what happened and talk about it, they begin to see time differently. When people face what happened and talk about it, they begin to see time differently. The trauma moves into the past, it no longer dominates the present. Once the story is told and understood, the survivor can start focusing on the future. From private pain to public truth. When victims realize their suffering wasn't just a private tragedy, it changes everything. They start to see it as part of a bigger social evil, not just bad luck. This realization helps them move away from silence, fear, and shame. In oppressive societies, victims suffer twice. First, from the torture or abuse itself. second, from being disbelieved or silenced by others. So, being silenced by others, it is the second torture. It is another torture. In Pakistan, victims of rape, many times they are silenced by their family members, and they are told that it will bring disgrace to their family. So it is double torture. When they finally speak in a setting like the TRC and are believed, it heals that second wound. When they finally speak in a setting like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and when they are believed, it heals that second wound. Keeping it inside makes the pain worse. When the victim does not have the opportunity to speak, when the victim is not allowed to speak, it makes the pain worse. Telling it out loud brings relief. A real example from South Africa: one man, blinded by an apartheid era police officer, nicknamed Rambo of the Peninsula, testified before the TRC. He was blinded. His he lost his eyesight under torture. After sharing his story, he was asked how he felt. He said, "What made me sick was that I couldn't tell my story. I couldn't tell my story, it made me sick. But now that I've told it here, I feel like I've got my sight back. But now that I've told it here, I feel, I feel like I've got my sight back." Such is the power of sharing one's trauma, sharing one's story with the public, with the society. This shows how telling one's truth can feel like regaining one's life. So, with this, my presentation comes to an end. So, why I have included this discussion, this topic in your course, Democracy and Democratization? In fact, it is very relevant. Here, Pakistan is a transitionary democracy. We are not a consolidated democracy. Pakistan is making a transition from authoritarianism to democracy. And there are certain institutions which help democratic transitions. So I think, in Pakistan, there is a debate. Sometimes people talk about that Pakistan needs such truth and reconciliation commissions at the national level and maybe at the lower levels, uh, particularly when they talk about the 1971 events. Similarly, the repression and oppression under different regimes, particularly unelected governments. So, when Zia regime oppressed the political workers, and in the recent past, there are several things which can be dealt with, which can be addressed through national reconciliation, truth and reconciliation commissions. So I personally believe that yes, in Pakistan we need such commissions. They must be established and they must take the nation forward, and they will certainly play a role in bringing unity and healing to the nation. So with this, I am closing YouTube. I join you back on phone call, WhatsApp.